Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Shayna Kataya. I'm the Director of Student Services for the district. And have you ever planned a party like in between Thanksgiving and December break and just thought nobody would show up maybe? This is a really exciting moment. So thank you all for being here so much. We have run these quarterly power hours for the last couple school years, and this is really a testament to what our families want to talk to each other and hear about. So we're so thrilled with everything that's going on. Personally, probably professionally, for all of you, there's a lot happening right now, so it really says a lot about all of you that you're willing to come out on a Monday night to be able to talk about how to best support all of our children. And as someone with a child who struggles with anxiety, I know that these are not easy conversations, and even as an educator who gets to go through lots of trainings, we often look at each other and say, what should we be doing about this? So these are not easy questions, and it takes a village. So we brought some of our greatest experts here in the district and also our community partners to be able to focus today on what anxiety and worry looks like in our children. And most importantly, we've done quite a few presentations over, really especially over the past couple years, around social emotional learning supports for our students. There was a great power hour a couple months ago on school safety that had a lot of focus on social emotional learning as well, and all the things we do within the district. What we wanted to focus on tonight is what we can do together and the language that parents can use at home, tools that you can actually leave and use in your own families. And of course, we'll highlight a few of the things that happen at school and what anxiety looks like and how we can recognize it. So before we start, I just want to take a minute and allow our panel to introduce themselves. I'll pass it over to Ms. Julian.
Hi, I'm Melissa Julian, the principal of Pittsford Mendon High School.
Hi, I'm Leilana Hughes. I'm the school social worker at Pittsford Mendon High School.
Hello, my name's Maggie Craig. I'm the mental health specialist split between Barker and Calkins.
Good evening, I'm Martha McKenna. I've been at Mendon Center for a number of years, and now I'm split across 4 buildings to all the primary schools as mental health specialist.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Stiles. I'm a clinical psychologist at URMC, and I'm a part of our school partnership that we have, so I consult with the different schools on supporting kids' mental health. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, not only for coming tonight, but for all of the planning that went into this evening and really wanting to make this something that was meaningful for all of you. So having said that, could you just get a show of hands of those of you that represent parents, guardians, caretakers of elementary age students? Great. How about middle school age parents? I'm with you. It's okay. It's all right. Yes. And high school. Oh, good. This is great. Okay, so we have a pretty good even spread. So we anticipated that a little bit tonight, and what we wanted to do, typically with our power hours, we start right at 6:30, we end right at 7:30, and we save time for questions and answers. What we thought we'd do is we're going to have some time to be able to talk through our objectives, understanding what anxiety looks like, learning some real strategies to be able to support our students, and then identifying when maybe more support is needed and who to reach out to for that. And we wanted to do that at each level because it does look a little different, elementary, middle, and high school. And then we'll stop in between each to be able to allow you to ask some questions. And we'll just make sure that we have enough time for each group to be able to go. And hopefully we'll have a little time for questions at the end as well. So this is a large group, which is very exciting. So some of you may not have this, and that's okay, because you can just visualize this in your mind as well. We have just a little activity for us to do at our tables. You have a little thought bubble, perhaps, in the middle of your table, and you can also just visualize it if you don't have one right in front of you. And this is something we might do with our students. It's something you could do at home easily as well, just on a blank sheet of paper, or print out some little thought bubbles. And it's a time to just dump the thoughts that are in our mind. So it could be something really benign like, I'm hungry, or it could be something that you're still holding on to, like a stressful meeting earlier in the day, or something that you're worrying about or thinking about for tomorrow or last week. So you could physically write if that works for you, or just take a moment and just think about those things that you would kind of dump into this thought bubble here. What are our minds full of? So we're just going to give you just 30 seconds to either mentally or physically just kind of dump out those things that are floating around in your mind. Okay, so this is a great example of something you can easily do at home with your kids, or with others living with you at home, or even just at work. Sometimes if you're stressing about something, just getting everything out. And then if you kind of scan through those things, what's in your mind? Are they things from the past? Are they things from the future? And really trying to bring our minds to the present and be more mindful versus just our full spinning minds, which tend to happen especially this time of year. So this is just an example of a way to get out everything. It's a great example of using this. I have a fifth grader who has a wonderful teacher, and they had a substitute, and she came home and she said, worst day of fifth grade ever, because they didn't get their homework or whatever it was that messed up their routine. And so I'm sure their teacher heard it the next day when he came back into the classroom, and he said, everybody, take a piece of paper out, write down all of your worries and concerns, roll them up, throw them into the middle of the room, and we're moving on. So we're hearing them, we're allowing them to get everything out of their minds, and it's not about having the answer for it. It's just about allowing it to get out there so we can continue to move forward. So with that, we're going to start with defining what anxiety is, and then we're going to start moving into how we can support our elementary age students. So I'm going to turn it over to Martha.
Okay, thank you. And Shayna, it sounds like your child is extremifying. That's a thought hole. So, good evening, and thank you again for coming. I was kind of stewing today about what anxiety was, and I was in a primary school building, and I thought I'd ask a couple of the kids, what is worry? And I got an answer that I thought was pretty cool, if worry could be cool. Worry is when you're hoping that your friend isn't hurt. And you can worry for yourself too. So these kids, they're not just worried about themselves. It's really goes beyond that. Is that better? Sorry, I turned my head a lot. Okay. As you can see, and you know that worry is normal, it's not dangerous, and it was originally designed to keep us safe. Good, better? Like a smoke alarm, anxiety and our amygdala, they send us alarms. They're meant to keep us safe. Like smoke alarms, anxiety can send us false alarms, okay? And tell us that there's danger when there is no threat. And that's when it begins to become problematic. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the professional here. Oh, no. So I'm going to move on to at school. Anxiety can look different with different people, different children, of course. And like you're going to notice with many of these, because I skipped over the fight, flight, and freeze responses, you're going to be able to recognize those in each of these categories up here. You know, the trips to the nurse and bathroom, obviously, flight. Some of them can be considered a couple of different categories. So I'm not going to go into everything, but like a highly distracted child, you might initially think ADHD, but they may have some kind of internal thoughts going on that are distracting them about their worries. At home, you'll notice around similar behaviors around avoiding threatening situations. And I would just always caution to avoiding these situations. Avoid trying to keep your child comfortable at all costs. That temporary relief that you and they may feel is temporary and can get worse with time. When you protect your child from those situations, you're kind of conveying the message that they can't handle it, which is not what you want to do. Or that situation or person should be feared. Some of the key points, we're going to move on. Behavior tells a story, so be curious. I tell the students to be a social detective and look around, use your eyes for thinking and notice others. Find patterns and understand their triggers. It may typically be in a new or uncertain, uncomfortable situation that you can kind of pinpoint. For example, speaking in front of large groups of people. I never knew this, but fight, flight, freeze. There's also fawn. Did you hear? You must know that. Fawn is a category that's recently been added. It may have recently or originally been studied by men for men, and fawn is one that is possibly came through with females on the rise in the field, and is more of a situation where you'd appease or please people in order to avoid a danger or a threat. So that's, and with that, I think as parents, sometimes we may do that to avoid, and we'd appease and please them in order to avoid their big uncomfortable feelings. Let's see, where are we? Make sure that their feeling brain doesn't overwhelm their thinking brain, the rational thinking brain. That's what we want to get to when we're calming them down or helping themselves calm down. So I want to get right into the strategies. I think it's just important to help them get to know their feelings, their worry, get to know their worry, and kind of don't make it this stranger, this scary thing. You know your own child. What strategies might work for them? Is it drawing, singing, talking about it, writing about it? Explore that with them. Don't let them shoot things down too quickly because it's different and new. Make sure their strategies are kind of varied from sensory to thinking strategies and breathing strategies. All the primary schools are sharing a lot of those strategies in the second grade or so, and we try to do it throughout, and many teachers will do that with a morning meeting where they have practice mindfulness and breathing as well. Ask them what they've learned, because they know a lot. Hot cocoa breaths this time of year is a big one, right? You smell the hot cocoa and then it's hot, so you breathe, you blow on it. Let's see, help them get to know their worry, don't fear it, and talk about your own worries. Normalize it. It shouldn't be something that's such a big stigma. Tell them about a scary time that you've faced. Tell them about mistakes that you've made in those scenarios. That's how we grow our brain, okay? We make mistakes and then we move on and fix them. They can also externalize their worry by creating a character to represent their worry. Give it a silly name, have them draw an even funnier picture about it. Mr. Waldo, it's not worry time right now. That's at 4:30. So I see you, I hear you, but we're going to worry later. Okay, we're going to talk to mom and dad later. Mom and dad don't want the worry to kind of interfere with the entire day. There should be kind of a set time of day if you've got a child that it's really interfering with family life. Again, a lot of this can be applicable to all ages. I have a friend with anxiety, and she's asking me about my little kid strategies, so she can use them. Let's see. I guess the biggest one that I like and the kids really identify with is the worry bully. Make sure your worry is not bullying you. What do you do with a worry or with a bully? You would stand up to them, talk back to them, use your inner coach. I can do that. You're not the boss of me. Would you let a friend talk to you the way your worry is talking to you? You kind of help just learn about it and study it and be curious again. Where were we? When you draw the picture, I also think that you can make it very silly, and it helps them, it helps it be less scary, basically. Don't solve the problems for them, solve it with them, collaborate, and gradually pull away so you're more of a consultant, okay, not managing all of their worries and stressors and problems. Don't seek to make them comfortable at all costs. We think we're neglectful if we're not always fixing everything. Express confidence that they can handle it. Collaborate in a plan with your child. It's their toolbox to build, and let them build a strong feelings foundation for life. And that's all for elementary.
Thank you. I love that idea of naming what it is. I remember my own child having a panic attack for the first time and waking up in the middle of the night and just seeing how scary it is for a child to feel like they can't breathe genuinely and not understanding why. And once we calm down and talking about that this is what's happening, and sometimes that happens to me, or sometimes that happens to my friend, and realizing, okay, this happens to people. And so the next time, at least you're naming it and understanding what it is and having some strategies to work through that. So it's so important. I think too, as parents, it's always a good idea to reach out. And if your child's really struggling, had a really hard night, is really worrying, perseverating on a thought, reach out to the teacher, let them know we're having a rough start this morning, they're stressing over this piece, and then they just kind of know what they're heading in for that day at school. So we wanted to open it up. If anyone had any questions, kind of just focused on the elementary lens before we move on to middle school. We'll take about 5 minutes if there's questions specific to elementary. I know it's a big group. Yes.
Hi, thank you. A question about hyperventilation. When my daughter gets really worked up, she will hyperventilate. I don't want her to fall over, to faint. So I've simply taken a washcloth, a towel, and just held it in front of her mouth, which sort of looks a bit like I'm, I guess, suffocating her. Am I doing the right thing? She's alive, so I'm not suffocating her fully.
Thank you.
I'm
Any help from our panel? Hyperventilating.
I'm going to let Allison take this one because you're a little more of the...
Sure. So I think part of it is, actually thinking about kind of what can we do to anticipate when those situations might arise. And if we know if there's common pattern to when those might arise, trying to think about what are strategies that we can have her practice beforehand so that she doesn't get to that place of hyperventilating, trying to have her start practicing some slow, deep breaths when you're noticing that she's showing cues maybe that she's moving in that direction, or other types of calming strategies. And then I think, if you do get to that moment, I think kind of coaching her through, you can have her sit down, put her head between her legs, and kind of practice counting those big, slow breaths with her to slow her whole body down, kind of coaching her through till she can do that on her own, and kind of labeling, reminding her what's happening. This is anxiety, it's okay, your body will go through this, we know it'll come back down, until she can kind of recognize and do that herself. I don't know if anyone else would add anything.
I was just going to add, you touched on the as she's, gearing up, having them have more self-awareness around how their body and brains feel. And we do that a lot in the zones of regulation work in the schools, and just understanding that you're going into the yellow zone, and that's a good time to begin that calming and breathing.
And reaching out, I know it's helpful sometimes to reach out to your child's school counselor. They may work through several strategies with them that they can walk away with, whether it's breathing up and down as they work through their hands, breathing in and out, or doing square breathing, right? And so whatever is going to stick with them and work with them, and then you'll be using the same language that they're using with their counselor at school, and sometimes even just breathing with them in a calm way, because I think we get worked up too when our kids start to work up. That's a great question. Anyone else? Elementary? Yes.
So one of the things up there said, help them see how their worry might hurt them. And I guess I'm just trying to think through, you don't want them worrying that they're worrying. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
How do you?
And I
how do you
think I
manage that?
mean, is that working okay? Okay. How it gets in the way of their life, things that they love to do, right? You love going to play dates and sleepovers, and your worry is keeping you from some of those special times. Going to relatives, simple, family coming for holidays can be really stressful for kids. So I think helping them manage those feelings so that they are not missing out on situations like that or joining clubs and activities.
Mr. Piero?
I wish I had this 20 years ago. Are there questions as a parent you should ask your children when they get off the bus or when they walk in the house before they start to share anything about the day?
I don't know about you guys or if anyone else wants to add, but I like to not jump at them with questions, and I like to just let them come in and get their snack and, hey, bud, I think if, as you go through these middle school and high school open houses, or not open houses, but the nights where curriculum night, and you're going to all their classes, how exhausting class to class to class, and then you realize, wow, like they're tired, it's tiring, and I think giving them some time and then maybe a little later doing some more specific probes, like, how was that test you were worried about? But if they're a big worrier, you might not want to draw attention to it, and just, when do you want to go to the strawberry patch? Something crazy, yeah.
I'll say I do one a lot that I like, and I do it in a lot of like anxiety and stress focused groups, and it's just a very basic check-in. You might have heard it before, but it's rose, bud, and thorn. Tell me about the best part of your day. Tell me about a part of your day that was hard or challenging or frustrating, and tell me about something you're looking forward to. That's the bud. Thorn is the bad thing. But it's just like it helps them think about all the parts of their day, not just perseverate on the one bad part. And it's simple. You don't want to do it every single day probably, but I like it for groups a lot.
And I think just to kind of bounce off that, a lot of the kids and parents will ask me, what do you say to the response when you say like, hey, how was your day, or how did it go? And they say, it's fine. I always counter with, oh, fine. Why not amazing? Why just fine? And then sometimes, it gets them to really process and reflect on their day, and they might decide like, actually, it wasn't all that bad. It was pretty good. Or vice versa, they'll open up to you and they might share a little bit more about why it wasn't amazing and it was only fine.
And I think just one other thing I'd add too is that, kids aren't always going to want to share, and that's okay, but it is really important for them to know that you as their caregivers and parents are there for them if they do want to talk. And so part of it is just starting that conversation and saying, if they say, I really don't want to talk about it, and you try some good strategies and they're just like, nope, that's okay. Just saying to them, hey, I'm here if you do want to talk, I just want you to know, and then if they do share, being really thoughtful about reminding them, hey, thanks for sharing about what happened today, right? And sometimes as parents, we can get stuck, when a child comes and they say something really hard happened that day, we can jump in and start problem solving for them. And sometimes they actually don't want us to problem solve. They just wanted to share that it was a hard day, right? Sometimes like when we get home from work and we want to just share with a partner or a friend or a family member just how hard it was, but we don't actually want them to tell us what we should have done differently or how we could have solved it. Kids are the same way, teens are the same way. So sometimes it's just also being aware of how we respond when they do share and just listening. And you could say, do you want to talk about how it could have gone differently, or I have some ideas? And if they're like, nope, just wanted to share, then again, you can just say, thanks so much for sharing. I'm here for you.
That's such a good point. We did an activity at one of our trainings around what stress and anxiety feel like for us, if you think of kind of that most stressed you've been and what you needed in that moment, and how very different that is for each person. If we went around this room and listed all the things we need very different things. Sometimes we don't want to be around anybody at all, and we had a really overwhelming day and we just want to be left alone, and our kids are the same way, and sometimes we're ready to talk. So yeah, that's a great point.
You can always start with the Bills are in first place. How about that?
Okay, we're going to move on to middle school and pass it on to Maggie.
Okay, great. So you're going to hear some common themes throughout the 3 levels, but what changes a little bit in middle school is just a little bit more freedom, a little more independence, a little bit more increased emotional regulation. Usually kids do a pretty good job at holding things together during the day. There are fewer, major outbursts than there are in elementary school. But we still see a lot of anxiety, and it looks many different ways at the middle school level. I have some major ones up here on the board. So there are always students who struggle with anxiety and worry who often have a specific class period, teacher, environment. Sometimes this very commons can be very stressful for kids. Maybe it's music class or a concert, sports practice, a specific thing that really brings their anxiety up towards like a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 or closer to that. We also do start to see some school avoidance or refusal. Maybe that could look like wandering in the halls instead of being in a class that they struggle with, or saying, oh, I'm really sick today, I can't go to school. You've probably heard that sort of thing before, and it can be really hard to parse out, is that a genuine medical reason, or is there something else going on? We might see changes in grades. So if your kid, usually is getting 80s, 90s, and they've failed every test in their social studies class, or there was a big English presentation and they had to speak and they got a really low grade, that could indicate some struggles with anxiety over academics. What else? Checking grades frequently, that can be one. A lot of our anxious warrior kids really have a lot of perfectionist thinking. They really want not just a 95, but 100 or a 98. They expect a lot of them, and we expect a lot of them, and that can kind of lead to a little bit of an over checking, like always having to be in Infinite Campus and see how their grade moves as other assignments are entered. Some of that, of course, is great, but it can be not so great when it's pushed too far. And then procrastinating, that can be one too. Sometimes that perfectionist thinking can lead to just putting it off because if it's not going to be perfect, I'm not going to do it right now. So that can also impact the grades. Those are some things we see here at school. And then at home, you might see, these are some visible things that you might see in your children. Maybe some fidgeting or being really restless, having a hard time sitting still, just being with their thoughts. Trouble sleeping or even eating, enjoying certain activities. A lot of kids who struggle with worry and anxiety, it's really hard for them to turn their brains off at night. I remember this in high school, thinking of like my list of 10 things I had to do the next day, and when was I going to do this? And you just can't really switch it to the calm, ready for sleep mode. That especially is exacerbated if they're on screens late at night. That can really kind of keep their brains awake. So that can be a common one. You might also see, like I mentioned, some of the physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, complaints about not feeling well. And then challenges with peers. Peer influences are such a big part of middle school. It is so meaningful to kids who is friends with whom and where people stand, and getting together with friends is really important. They might be struggling with some of those dynamics. There might be anxieties around friendships. So that's certainly a common one that we see at school and at home. And then these are things that are less visible. It's harder to see outright, but many anxious or worrier kids do experience these things. The thought patterns, Martha kind of touched on this, but these are like spirals, negative thinking, where they really catastrophize. They think about the worst case scenario. If I don't study for my science test tomorrow, I'm going to get a 60, and then I'm going to get a C for the first quarter, and then I'm never going to be able to get my grade up to an A by the end of the year. It's just, and I'll never go to college, right? Taking it all the way to the extreme, when we know that's not true, It's not a true thought, but it feels true to them. That might also be negative self-talk, putting themselves down, not feeling confidence in themselves, or those perfectionist thoughts, like I mentioned. Racing thoughts, trouble focusing, that can be a really common sign that there's just a lot going on in our brains, right? Like we did in the activity earlier. They can't quite focus because there's so much up there that they're thinking about or worrying about. They might have strong feelings like shame, self-doubt, guilt, fear, worrying that things aren't going to be okay. And also I think an important part that we see a lot in middle school is a lot of self-comparison, and this can come from social media a lot of the time, but not exclusively. But if you are noticing that your kids are really spending a lot of time on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, where they're just, watching people live, and, that can be great and fulfilling for a little bit, but it can really affect their self-confidence and lead to a lot of self-doubt. And it can become a little bit of a cycle too. Okay. So some of the key points to think about with your middle schoolers when we're thinking about anxiety and worry are similar to what we heard at the elementary level. We want to normalize it. These are very normal feelings. They exist on a spectrum. Some are really significant and really interfere with daily life, and some don't. They just bother us a little bit, and then we move through it, and it's okay. Like Martha said, you don't, as parents, want to remove situations that cause anxiety, that could be reinforcing. We need to gently push kids through those negative feelings, and at the bottom, I say express positive but realistic expectations. Remind them of times when they've been anxious before and they've pushed through and they've done okay. They did a great job. For instance, I had a student recently who has a lot of anxiety about speaking in class, like a Spanish class or an English class. And so I try to remind him, 2 weeks ago you did this assignment, you videoed your assignment, you submitted it to your teacher, you pronounced the words correctly, like you did it, that's really great. Reminding them of those strengths that they have. Identifying triggers, labeling specific worries, that goes back to talking about the feelings and just normalizing them. You also, these two towards the end are important, and Martha touched on those. Modeling healthy coping skills and helping your students, your children, develop those too. That means getting enough sleep, not too much time on the phone, getting exercise, social time, all the things that we need for balance in our lives. Those are really important to help your students develop, especially in middle school when they're having more independence. They're not quite at high school where they're like fully able to do that by themselves. But that can be really helpful too, just to have good emotional baseline. Okay, and lastly, these are some similar points, but this is honestly a lot of what I do with kids. If I'm seeing a kid in my office for individual counseling, or I'm doing a group, we're talking about a lot of these things. We're, first of all, building their coping skills toolbox. These are things that you've probably heard of and maybe done before. Meditation, breathing exercises like the hand one, or there's infinity signs, or so many different ones. Some kids really like taking out their phone and looking at pictures of their pets, or like a family vacation. That can be really calming. There are grounding exercises. This one, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we might use if a student's really kind of like in a panicky or anxious space, where we say, okay, tell me 5 things you can see. Tell me 4 things you can hear. Tell me 3 things you can smell. 2 things you can touch. 1 thing you can taste. Like all the way down, it just really brings them back to their body. We talk about talking to themselves in a great way, in their minds, positive self-talk, taking a perspective, zooming out from the situation. Okay, I'm really anxious about this test. I don't feel prepared. I'm not going to do well. Okay. So if that's true, if you don't do well, then what will happen? Okay, and then what will happen? Just kind of zooming out. And really the last point is super important. This is what we do in schools with your kids all the time. We really try to help them build their tolerance for these activities that do provoke anxiety in them. Because we know, kids who struggle with public speaking, it is going to be an expectation throughout their time in school that they will speak in class, or they might have to give a presentation. So we have to just gently allow them experiences with that discomfort so that it gets a little bit easier every time. I think that's it for the middle school level.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Middle school questions, yes.
I'd just like to talk a little bit about the social media aspect. So my son is definitely a worrier, and we've kind of let him get some social media time, but it's very, you only get this much time. And there's some days I feel like I should just take it away totally, and I know he would flip out for sure. But I guess I just, striking that balance between allowing him to spend, to socialize, although we don't restrict like real socializing, like face to face, but he doesn't seem to like or want to do that. So I don't know. Any advice on the social media stuff in general, I guess?
I think that's a great question. It really can be, first of all, an opportunity for socializing and also a break for their brains. A lot of kids, when they come home, like Martha said, they're exhausted. They just want to like turn off for a little bit, and social media is a way that many of them do. I don't think it's a bad thing inherently as long as you're setting boundaries around it, which it sounds like you are. I think timers are really great, like 20 minutes a day. I think there should be an expectation that it's not happening right before bed, like maybe your phone's charging in parents' room, not the kids' room, because it's designed to be addictive and they want to stay on all night. But you kind of facilitating those healthy boundaries around it, but still allowing access to it, I think is just the right mix. And if you notice that it's becoming like pushing every day more, then you scale back, I think.
One thing I just would add to is, I think as you were mentioning, kind of building their awareness and their skill around how to use social media in a way that benefits them and doesn't have that harmful piece. So part of it is kind of raising their awareness of how do they feel before and after they spend time on social media, and making sure that the ways that they're using it make them feel good. So, are they connecting with people that make them feel good, or looking at things that, make them feel good? And if not, kind of reflecting on maybe I want to shift what I'm looking at or what I'm reading about. The other thing that's sort of related to social media is how they consume news, which sometimes happens through social media, but just kind of raising an awareness that, especially for kids that worry a lot, reminding them, helping them understand what happens. So for example, if they click on an article that's about some disaster, Google or YouTube or whatever it is they're on is going to feed them more of that type of article. So then it feels like the reality is that everything bad is happening because that's all the articles or the information being fed to them. So also helping them raise their awareness that that can happen, and so that they know, I could click on different articles, or if I'm getting fed this, that doesn't mean that that's all there is out there. So kind of a learning process with that as well.
So at the middle level, what I notice is that that's also the time where students tend to separate themselves from parents a little bit, part of that freedom portion. It's also a time where it's really difficult to get a read on your children. And so when you see signs and symptoms of anxiety, and you talk to your child about why are you not eating, why are you not sleeping, why are you acting this way, and you're getting the I'm fine at school answer. What tips could you give to parents that are concerned about their middle-aged students that aren't vocalizing or sharing essentially what you're seeing, but there's something there?
I think I would start with lots of observations like, hey, I'm noticing you stayed up really late last night, or I'm noticing you had a hard time at dinner, I'm noticing you didn't want to go to your friend's house, or whatever it is you're noticing. Just kind of neutral observations that you as a parent are seeing something different in your kid. And without judgment, it doesn't mean your anxiety is at an 8 out of 10, like that's really bad, I'm really worried. Just kind of noticing some differences. Hey, is something going on with that? I think that over time helps your kids actually have self-awareness about their behavior too, and maybe they didn't really realize that there was a change, but when you say it and it happens for a few weeks, they sort of think, maybe I am acting a little differently, like, and reflect themselves. Like Allison said earlier, this is really hard because not every kid is ready to talk about it or wants to, because maybe it doesn't feel that big for them. But knowing that you're there and ready to listen when they are ready, I think is really valuable. Others, I'm sure, have thoughts on that one too.
I was just going to add that, you may not be their person at different points. It might be Aunt Sally, I would say, extend as many adults, have them develop closer relationships with other adults outside of the home as they grow up. Trusted adults at school, trusted adults at home too.
Thank you. Any last question for middle school? Okay, we will pass it on to Leilani.
Okay, so talking about the high school, I'm going to be honest, there's going to be some overlap as children start to get older and they gain a little bit more independence. We're really going to focus on self-awareness, helping them build the skill, helping them identify their own signs, symptoms, and helping them be proactive, like that was mentioned before, or coping in the moment, or tolerating, building resilience. So like I said, there'll be overlap. So some of the things more specific to high school, such as unexplained outbursts that's up there, that might be that you think something's maybe a 3-4, but the reaction is maybe a 9-10, and you're not really sure why, and that's not how they would usually react. This could be crying excessively or screaming or yelling and not really knowing what they're feeling in the moment, just being really heightened or elevated. Another thing about school performance is, like mentioned before, it can look like procrastination, missing assignments. It can look like not caring anymore about school. I know we see a lot of that in our seniors, especially maybe applying to colleges and prioritizing certain things. And then it can also look like perfectionism and just not accepting anything less than perfect, or their idea of perfect, their perceived idea of perfect. And then substance misuse, so using mood-altering substances to just numb their pain, their feelings, or just ignore what's going on with them. And then similar, just the aches and pains, the going to the nurse or having medical issues, stomach cramps, nausea, headaches, without any really explained medical diagnosis. Just some common ones we see. Just recognizing, too, that this looks different in every student we see, or your children, even in the household, and everyone's an individual, and that's why the self-awareness piece is really key. So some of the things there are thinking and feeling. So just again, a lot of the feelings we've already talked about, like feeling worried, tired, inferior, exposed, weak, scared, frightened. Again, they can feel one of these feelings or multiple of these feelings at once. So it's really key to help them understand what they're feeling when they're feeling. And then it can kind of help you navigate the trigger, what's going on. And then just some of the thinking patterns we've talked about. What we do a lot in the counseling office is helping them change this thinking pattern and just making it so that they are not as hard on themselves as their anxiety is making them. Like we said, the worry bully, right? So we just want to keep it really positive, help them with their confidence and building the skills to do that. We see a lot of this at the high school, like we talked about negative self-talk, labeling, the should statements, all or nothing thinking. In the moment, challenging the thought while still allowing empathy and validation. You know, a student might come to me and say, I fail every bio quiz I ever take. I might, validate that feeling that maybe it's not going as good as they want, but then I might fact check by logging on to Infinite Campus and showing them that they didn't fail all the quizzes, but maybe they just didn't do as well as they wanted to. So just, again, being supportive, but teaching them the skill and those negative thinking patterns. So some key points for the toolbox is just, like I said, getting to know yourselves individually and helping your student get to know themselves, helping them tolerate being uncomfortable at times. all of us experience anxiety, some worse than others, but in the end, we can't avoid it, so helping them tolerate it. And then just getting the coping skills to them and what helps them individually, normalizing, validating, but helping them build the skills, building resiliency, and just adding to your toolbox. You know, music might help you all week one week, and then music's not helping the next week, and that's okay. Just helping them get through it and remind them of all the different coping skills that they have available to them. And then for the family one, a lot of these were mentioned already, but again, just helping your child at home and reminding them of some of the coping skills, such as mindfulness, deep breathing, journaling is a really big one. I use journaling a lot in different forms. It can be writing notes in their phone since they're always on it anyway, make it be productive and healthy and helpful. A lot of students who struggle with saying the problem out loud, either to their guardians, parents, loved ones, or preferred staff, like anyone, just talking about it can be hard. So I always say, you know, you can email me or we can do a remind text if it's just for some of them. A lot of it's easier to type. And it's pretty great to see how many students can really identify and express emotions in writing. Just because they do it all day with their friends and on social media. So it's a good way to have them do that for you too. Like I said, music, fidgets, yoga, muscle relaxation, all these things that you can do at home. They're things that we do at school too, and we recommend in our classroom lessons, community circles, in my office, in the counselor's office. So all tools that can be done both at school and at home.
Thank you so much. Before we open up for our last round of questions, just wanted to turn it over to Dr. Stiles to talk more specifically about the role of parents and caregivers.
Thank you. Great. So one thing that I want to acknowledge is that it can be really challenging as parents to see your kids in distress, right? Evolutionarily, we are wired to respond. We're primed to respond when our kids are in distress and to try to protect them. And so it can be really hard with anxiety because they're feeling that distress, right? And we pick up on that. And also, it can be tough because then we get stuck in this anxiety cycle, right? So a child expresses a worry, parent responds, feeling a little worried maybe themselves, tries to reassure them. Maybe the child becomes more worried, shows additional signs of anxiety. Parent feels more worried themselves, might start to feel overwhelmed, a little bit frustrated because they're trying to get their child to move on, right? And then we kind of end up in this space where both parent and child feel a bit overwhelmed, more anxious, and kind of leave the situation feeling unsure if moving forward that child could handle that situation again, or if both could handle that situation again. So it's a really tough and normal experience that you may have had getting stuck in this sort of anxiety cycle. So how do we respond to our child when they're anxious? Oftentimes their responses can be on this sort of continuum from accountable to accommodating. And so, on the one hand, accommodating can be really, accountability can be helpful and important, but it can go too far, right? If we get to a place where we're kind of completely minimizing and invalidating their experience, we're saying, if they're anxious about going to school, we're saying, just, it's going to be fine, just get in the car, right? Like we said, we're going to do this, you got to do it, don't worry about it, right? And then on the other side, accommodating can also go too far too, right? Where we see our child in distress and we say, okay, yeah, that seems really hard. You know what? You can stay home, or you don't have to do that thing. We'll try again another day, right? And so I encourage you to think about, where do you naturally fall on this spectrum? Because we usually have a place that we tend to fall. And then thinking about, where might your child need you to fall? So maybe moving yourself closer to that middle. And there are a couple of strategies I just want to highlight of how we can get ourselves to kind of stay in that middle ground a little bit more. And some of these have really been touched on throughout all the different levels that we've been talking about. But just to kind of zoom in for a second and make it pretty concrete. The first thing we really want to make sure that we're doing is validating, as you've heard, your child's feelings, and really provide some empathetic reflection. So empathetic reflection, what that might sound like is if a child says, let's say this example that we're going to talk about is anxiety around school, but this could be related to any kind of anxiety. So maybe the child says, I'm scared to go to school. And rather than responding with, don't worry, you're fine, you don't need to be scared, there's nothing to worry about. Empathetic reflection would sound something like, you're really worried and I understand that. Other kids would be worried too about getting to school. Right? So what we've done is we're hearing them, we're validating their feelings, we're saying it's okay and it's normal that you feel that way. As a trusted adult, I hear you, and we're not trying to solve or reassure in the moment. So once we've validated and provided this empathetic reflection, we want to express our confidence. So even if you're feeling really anxious inside and you actually don't know if they're going to make it through, you as the parent really can help the situation by exhibiting that confidence, right? Expressing that to them, because kids pick up on that. And so if they hear your confidence, they feel more confident to be able to handle it themselves. So, this might sound something like, I know how hard this is for you, and I believe that you can do it. I know you can do this hard thing. It's also important to consider what are things that help your child to feel calm. So we've talked about a number of those things, but putting together with them, creating that plan is important. And knowing that coping strategies can sometimes become almost like a trigger word, because kids can say like, well, none of these work, right? Like I've tried everything. And I think an important piece is, first of all, that not every coping skill works in every situation. And they also actually some of them take practice and getting the body comfortable with them. So sometimes trying to practice it with your kids or encouraging them to use these strategies before they're feeling anxious or when it's low, those are important moments. And sometimes in a moment it might take 3 or 4 different strategies before it starts to work to bring them down if their anxiety has gotten really high. And then I want to just mention, so if you've done 1 through 3, and you still are in this ongoing discussion, that is a really good signal to try to pause, because it means that you're really talking more with anxiety rather than with your child, right? So the worries back and forth, but what if this, but I can't do this? So that's a really good time to say, I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna take a deep breath, and I'm gonna remind my child of the plan, and I'm gonna let them know I'm gonna stop talking about it. And I love you, and I know you can do this. And the last piece that ties into is just really being aware of that firm limit setting. Kids really need us to be that supportive person to help them follow through on something that they really don't want to do. And then one thing, moving into how we are supporting them, it's also really important that we take care of ourselves, right? This is the thing that always goes. We say self-care is so important for parents, and then it's the thing that goes away. But it really is important, and I encourage you to think about it not necessarily even as, it doesn't have to be me first, but me too, right? We really can't take care of our kids if we aren't in a good space ourselves. We can't be patient and listen and validate their experience and put our heads together to make a plan if we're in a tough space. So trying to even just think about what are small things that we can do to keep ourselves in a good space. Getting your basic needs met, connecting with others, being aware of our own thought processes and whether our thoughts are fueling the fire or helping kind of to keep ourselves calm, are just really important things. And I know that's so hard, but I encourage you to think about even one small thing that you could do and incorporate into your day to keep yourself in a good, calm space. And then the last thing I want to just touch on before we go back to questions is how do we know when we might need more formal support? That's a question that comes up a lot, right? Because it can be hard to know. It's, moving on the spectrum, it's getting harder, but when do we need more formal support? And so one thing to think about is, when is it starting to really get in the way of things, really interfere and become impairing with things like social relationships, school, and family? Thinking about when your family is like really starting to live around the anxiety, and that list of avoidance, things that you're avoiding are getting longer and longer. Those are really good signs to get some additional support from someone. And if it's starting to just cause a lot of significant distress in the family. And when you notice those things, a couple really good first steps are reaching out to your school counselor, is a really nice place to start. Also, reaching out to your pediatrician can be a really good way to start to get connected with more formal care. And we also are providing a list of a lot of other kind of outpatient services and supports, but those are two great places to start if you're just getting the ball rolling.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yes, within your packets, and if you haven't picked them up, there's some more up here. There are lists of resources and strategies, both here within your home and then within our community as well. So, last opportunity for a few more questions. Yes. I should have started over here.
I'm just interested in school, if I heard from elementary, middle, high, if there is a category that you would say is the number one cause of anxiety at each level.
I think for high school, I'd say probably social and peers, and then maybe academics after that.
I would agree. I would say half and half academics and social.
Definitely varies with the child, but a lot of it, I feel like, comes from the people in their life, especially the adults in their lives. They take cues from you guys. No pressure.
Well, I don't know where my anxious child gets it from, so it must be someone else that lives with us. Yes.
Thank you. My question has to do with the larger context. If you will be able to talk about anxiety in today's circumstances, right? So our kids went through COVID pandemic, they had school shutdowns, there are school shootings repeatedly in the news, and all other kinds of pressures and uncertainties. And then, of course, we have things that have been around for a long time, such as bullying at school, now taking place in new contexts on social media and so on. So how do you see this larger context influencing, what's happening with anxiety with kids?
That's a great question. And, we do know, even just from the research that's been done in the last year or two since COVID started, that we have seen a significant increase in youth's mental health concerns and in particular anxiety and depression. So, that it is a huge stressor, that we all experienced. It was hard for adults and it's hard for kids and teens, especially with all the disruption. I think if there's any kind of silver lining, it's that there is even more awareness of mental health for kids and teens and even more resources that are being put towards it. And I think that's a really good thing that was already on the rise before COVID, but that definitely exacerbated things. So, I think what we can do as parents and caregivers in school is really coming together to learn these strategies for how to support them and help them build their awareness of how to help themselves. And I think, something that's good to recognize too is that we know that while adversity can be really hard, it can actually be something that builds resilience and that people can come out of that adversity in a much stronger place than before. And I think our kids and teens can really get there.
Hello. I know you mentioned in elementary school how they help kids. I know that in middle school, because I have a son, he has support. However, as a former teacher, I know also it's very important to get that in touch. I think it's so important that teachers recognize that kids have anxiety. I don't see it. And as a former teacher, I'm a former math teacher. I saw that in my kids. And I know the subject is important. I know honors classes are important, but I don't see that caring part. I see that missing so much in middle school. And it's really creating anxiety in probably not just my child, but in a lot of kids. I don't know if as a school board they're doing something. I know I did it in my classroom. I know my kids love me because I care, not just for the subject. I make them love math, but not just the subject. I think behind every student there's a child that needs to be understood, and you have to treat them with certain compromise of subject and care. And I don't know if they do it across the board. I just feel it has to be really installed in each teacher to remind them that it's not a grade, it's not, I'm gonna take as many points I can off, because that creates a really hard anxiety on them.
From the administrative lens, I can assure you that because of where we've been in the last few years, we are really trying to make a strong statement using social emotional learning in the classroom. And what does that look like? And each of our last few staff development days has been a concentration around exactly that. How do we get kids to know? They won't learn unless they know we care. So how do we help them understand that we care? And one of the things we've been doing, and one of the things we've done 612 so far, is what's called a connected adult activity, where teachers identify who their students are that they connect with, and kids identify who their trusted and connected adult in the building is. And then we match those. And then any student who does not have a connected adult, we reach back around to make sure we are hitting those connections. Because the fundamental part of education is we all get into it for the same reason, because we care about kids. So concentrating on that message over and over again has been part of our themes this year that Mr. Opiro has heralded from the beginning, but making sure relationships come first. So I hope that helps.
Okay, last question.
In this day and age where learning differences, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, is being recognized as being fairly common, neurodiversity probably accounts for 10% of the population, and probably a large proportion of the kids who are anxious. I have a son who goes to Cochrane Roads Middle, and he eats lunch every day by himself, and he comes home anxious every day. And can we have training for the other children to have compassion for these kids? Because in the end of the day, after COVID, he refuses to take his mask off wherever he goes. So he refuses to go outside the home. Trying to boundary set and trying to get him out of the home to eat ice cream, to go to movies. He won't go out. Because he doesn't feel accepted. And I think training for teachers is important, but training for kids is important too, to see these children who are hurting.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that there are probably other parents in this room who have kids with similar struggles, and it's really a really hard and painful thing. Nobody wants their kid to feel not accepted during the school day, or lonely, or worried for their safety, which I know many kids still struggle with after COVID with masking. And we still have kids who wear masks at school, and that's perfectly fine. This is something that I think all of us at this table really value. We really want kids to feel welcome, supported, free to be themselves at school, and it's really hard. Middle school in particular, I think, can be a very hard time for that. There's a lot of dynamics at play, and shifting relationships, and it's not easy. But we really care about making all kids more inclusive of each other, for sure.
If I could just add to that, there's kindergarten through high school, all ages, the social emotional part is so huge, but at the middle level, it's probably the most tricky. I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself? I'm sorry, I'm Mike Pure, I'm the superintendent. So at the middle level, I feel that if anyone especially is having a similar experience, the school needs to know about it. And I think that sometimes we're reluctant to notify the school because I don't want to be that parent. I don't want to target on my son or my daughter, but we need to hear that. This is why we have flex time this year at the middle level. The last 12 weeks or so has been focusing with students on training around social and emotional supports. There's nothing more important than for kids to feel validated in our schools. Without that core, the learning's not going to happen. Self-worth's not going to happen. That's a mutual goal that all of us in this room share. There's no reason we can't figure that out. And there's so many wonderful supports here and all around us at each of our schools. So if your child is struggling, finding connections, eating alone, not wanting to go to school, as a parent, you can no longer be reluctant to reach out and notify the school. Your first call, if you don't know who to call the principal first. And then we work out a plan. And if that plan doesn't work, we go with plan B. I think that the worst thing we can do is expect some miracle to happen the next day and my child come home happy. There needs to be interventions. We need to be all hands on deck, and we need to talk it through. Parenting is, I love that question about where's this world, how are kids experience anxiety with everything that's going on? None of us in this room have ever dealt with that. We've never dealt with, we dealt with a normal teasing and bullying, and that was it. And then the day ended. And today we deal with the pressures of, additional pressures of college, of what's happening in the world, what's happening in politics, what's happening in social media, what's happening with catastrophes, what's happening with school shootings. We all feel that. Our kids are going to feel it. So my ask from everyone here is to don't let this feel like it's a battle you're taking on yourself. Involve us. Involve the principal, involve the counselors. Let's work together. And I saw several slides that says anxiety needs to be normalized. Mental health needs to be normalized. For too long, we've dealt with this in little pockets. And so now it's time to you need to feel comfortable reaching out. And we will do everything we can to make every one of your children feel comfortable at school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our panel. And we really want to thank PTSA for your support, not just in sharing about this event, but for our snacks, which we hope you'll take some with you when you go. To our Board of Education and Superintendent for continuing to support these evenings. And we'd love to follow up with a survey to you all to just be able to gather some feedback on other topics or follow-ups that you would like. So if you didn't get a chance to sign in, please do with your email, and we will follow up by the end of the week with a survey to gather more feedback from you all. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.